Welcome to The Spiritual Life. I'm Father Jim Martin. On this podcast, we reflect on how people experience God in their prayer and in their daily lives. And I'm joined by my wonderful producer, Maggie Van Doren. Maggie, so good to be with you.
It's great to be with you on our final episode of season 1 of The Spiritual Life.
And we are so excited. We've been waiting for this guest for a long time. We are speaking with Brené Brown. Can you tell us a little bit about her for those who don't know her?
Yeah. So in addition to being my personal hero, Brené Brown is a research professor at the University of Houston, where she holds the Huffington Foundation Endowed Chair at the Graduate College of Social Work. Brené Brown burst onto the scene in 2010 with a TED Talk called The Power of Vulnerability. It went viral. I recommend it to everybody, and she has many other great talks that she's done since. She is the author of 6 New York Times bestsellers and the host of 2 award-winning podcasts. Brené holds the position of Professor of Practice and Management at the University of Texas at Austin McCombs School of Business. And in 2024, she was named as the Executive Director of the Center for Daring Leadership at Better Up. Brené lives in Houston, Texas with her husband, Steve. They have 2 children, Ellen and Charlie, and by their own admission, a weird Bichon Frise named Lucy.
I am super excited about this episode. I've listened to several of her talks and, of course, knew of her beforehand, and then read her new book, A Strong Ground. And it's really amazing. She is so open and vulnerable, as you would expect her to be, and honest about her faith, her spiritual journey, and just being a child of God. So it's a really, really wonderful episode.
Yeah, so we'll get to that interview with Brené in just a minute. But first, we have our audience question. This one comes from Nick. And it is, how can one return to an active practice of faith after a long absence?
Well, Nick, that's a great question. And I think the first thing to recognize is that any desire that you have to return to faith, spiritual practice, church, is coming from God, right? That's how God would call us, right? How else would God call us other than by awakening the desire in us, right, to return? So to really take that seriously, that it's not just something that's coming from Nick, but that it's a call. And that can make it a lot less confusing because you have confidence that God is calling you. I would say also it's natural to come back to a faith practice or a religion or even a parish differently than when you left, right? So sometimes people have to, in a sense, distance themselves from the faith of their childhood, not all the time, but sometimes in order to reappropriate it in an adult way, they have to sort of see it in a new way and then come back, right? And so it's okay if you don't see God or the church the same way that you did when you were younger. And finally, I would say just try to find a welcoming parish, right? Or welcoming church or welcoming faith community. But it's a great question, and Brené does a great job of answering that too in our conversation.
Yeah. And if you have a question for Father Jim, you can send it to us. We have been reading these, cataloging these, looking for the perfect opportunity to pitch them in the podcast. And so keep them coming. Even though this is the final episode of the season, we will continue to read those questions and take them up in season 2. And if you want to do that, you can write us at thespirituallife@americamedia.org.
And now a word from our sponsor. Looking for a simple way to deepen your own spiritual life? Give Us This Day is a superb resource that helps Catholics stay rooted in Scripture and in prayer, wherever you are, no matter how busy you are. It features reliable and relatable spiritual reflections, essays on the lives of the saints, the daily Mass readings, and of course, prayers to accompany you throughout the day. I am very honored to be an editorial advisor, and I've been writing a monthly essay called Teach Us to Pray from the very beginning, and I use it every day. I use Give Us This Day every day. And here's a great offer right now. Listeners of The Spiritual Life can get 10% off their new print subscription. Just visit giveusthisday.org/spirituallife and join our community of Catholics praying together. Again, that's giveusthisday.org/spirituallife. And now, without further ado, on to our wonderful conversation with Brené Brown. Brené Brown, welcome to The Spiritual Life.
Thank you on many different levels. I'm excited to be on the Spiritual Life podcast, and I'm excited and anxious to be in the Spiritual Life, period.
Yes, me too. It's a real honor for us to have you on, and so many of our listeners are very excited. So I'm just going to jump right in. I have read and listened to several of your talks, which I found super helpful, as millions have, and really mind expanding. And it always makes me really curious. Every time I'm listening to you, I think I really want to know about your religious upbringing. So can you talk a little bit about that and kind of where you are today?
Yes, I am. I want to say that I'm excited to be with you too. I think you're an important part of my practice,
Thanks.
and so I was kind of. Well, this gets to your question. I was, in some ways, I always say I was raised by a wild pack of Jesuits. So I was baptized in the Episcopal Church in San Antonio. Moved to New Orleans young, like at two or three, maybe. That was probably my real formation, like my real spiritual formation. Went to Holy Name of Jesus Catholic school. My house became a way station for Jesuits, liberation theologists traveling back from Central America and kind of coming in back into New Orleans. And so we were connected with Holy Name of Jesus, the church and the school. I had a really wild experience in second grade. This, I think,
Let me
breaks
pause
all.
you. Can I pause you for a
Okay.
second?
Yeah.
I am totally fascinated. Your house became a way station for Jesuit liberation theologians. How did that happen, and what did that mean?
Well, they were just in and out of our house while they were traveling, and so I think I think maybe my mom and some of her friends were kind of ponytail clog wearing. I don't know what they were, but they were involved in the church and involved at the school, and I think people needed a place to stay as they were traveling back to wherever their home churches were and coming, from Central America. And so I think they stopped and stayed at our house. And I just remember, to be honest with you, a lot of good New Orleans food and a lot of cocktails and a lot of debate. My dad's really conservative.
Okay, well, three things Jesuit like: food, cocktails, and debate. So they obviously
Right.
found a good home. So you started to say, before I interrupted you, you had an experience in second grade.
Super dubious. This is a questionable Catholic experience. I was in class and I thought it was God. Someone came to pull me out of class, and it was a bishop in his outfit. And I got pulled into a room close to the principal's office. And we went through, oh my gosh, we went through, what's the prayer? The, the big one.
Our Father,
No.
Hail Mary,
No.
the Creed.
The Apostles' Creed.
There you go. Okay, God. So he invited you to say the Creed?
No, we went through the creed line by line
I see.
and to understand what it means. And he would ask me questions. We believe in one holy Catholic and apostolic, got that one, right? That's the creed. The Nicene Creed. Okay. And he asked me questions about it. And I said, okay. And then he handed me an envelope. And then I took the envelope home, and it was a note to my parents saying that from this point forward, I was Catholic, not Episcopalian, and that they need to get on board. And so they started their Maranatha classes, their conversion classes. And so that's how I became Catholic.
Wow, that's a pretty hardcore, kind of hard sell there.
I don't know. I loved it. My parents were super excited. And that's when I really was first introduced to what would forever be my internal conflicts about the church.
You want to talk about that, or?
Yeah, no, I mean, loved God, was like crystal clear that was a huge part of my life, remained that way. Was not crazy about Sister Davida. Loved the back and forth of the liturgy, loved everything about Mass, and we went all the time and in Latin once a month. Loved all of that. Didn't like the rules used in punitive ways. I was caught off guard even as a child by the discrepancies, I think. And then I realized, I think by fifth grade, that the discrepancies had nothing to do with God. And so they very much mirrored the discrepancies I think I saw with my parents even. You love me, but why are you behaving like this? God is love, but why is the church behaving like this? And so I think that from a very early age, God was irreducible in my life. The church felt optional.
That's a great way of putting it. Well, so you became Catholic. How old were you when you became Catholic?
7.
7. So take us through the next few years and maybe young adulthood. I mean, was spirituality and God a part of your day-to-day life?
I mean, we moved from New Orleans to Houston. We joined a parish there. It's been a very traumatic journey, I guess, in some ways. There was a deacon that was a Jungian analyst that was very involved in our church. And at the time, my high school had the highest suicide rate of any high school in the country. And it was kind of first generation professionals, with like a Trans Am with a bow on top when you turn 16, lots of drinking, lots of drugs, lots of loss of, the things that hold families and communities together. And I was going to CCD. I went through, communion, confession, confirmation. I liked our church. I liked this deacon. But one Sunday, he talked about the suicides in our community, and we never saw him again. And my mom was like I don't know if this is a thing, but she was like a very Jungian Jesuit. Mm-hmm. And very progressive in her ideas and thoughts, and started to get really angry. And then I've never told this story, so I've never thought about it. It's weird how it's all happening at the same time. But then this Jungian deacon was my mom's therapist. And I went to St. Mary's in San Antonio, a Marianist college. There just became a broader delta between the God I thought I knew and wanted to spend my life knowing, and not knowing, understanding, unraveling, and the church. And so I think what ended up happening is my parents got a divorce. It was terrible. My dad blamed this deacon, who was a therapist in the Union. I was at St. Mary's. I was a poetry major. My favorite professor she was gay. She was tormented by some of the more conservative students and not protected by the faculty. At some point in that period, I was like, I'm done. I'm done. I'm done for sure with the church. I'm pretty done with Catholicism. And I'm not sure that I thought maybe I was going to be done with God, but that just elicited a chuckle from God. So I was like, can I just pretend? It's like, do what you need to do. I'll ride shotgun through your pretending phase. I was like, okay. And so it wasn't until, later, much later, when I was probably in my early 30s, and Steve and I had our first daughter, that I was like, oh, I need to make sure you can choose whatever you want, but I need to make sure at least you have an understanding of God. And so both of my kids ended up going to Catholic high school. I became an Episcopalian again. I converted legally. I don't know what that is. I got received in that church, and I had to do less reconciling. When you see 200 Episcopal priests in their vestments surrounding the Capitol in Texas around gun laws, and you see people protecting LGBTQ folks, then I'm like, okay, this is less reconciliation. And I do love the Episcopal Church. My heart will always be Catholic, and probably some level of mystical Catholic, although I Googled it to see if that was what I was before the podcast. And there's a couple of pieces that I can't abide, but the others I like.
Well, first of all, thank you for sharing that story. You know, it's a grace to be able to separate what the church does from God, right? Because the church is not God. And so that's a grace. And to be able to hold on to that, because, I mean, as you know, a lot of people will jettison God because they they connected so strongly. Let me ask you though, what does it mean for you to be a mystical Catholic? What does that mean for Brené Brown?
The three holiest places for me, the thin places for me at church, and I haven't gone to church in before COVID maybe, are passing the peace, being at the rail, and singing. And mostly because I'm doing those things with people I'd like to punch in the face. But it doesn't matter in those moments. It doesn't matter when I'm at the rail and I'm next to you and we are, taking communion together. Now I'm not going to drink after you because I'm a germaphobe and I'm not a fan of that practice. But unless I'm sober, so I just don't do that. But or when I'm singing with you or I'm passing the peace with you, that's mystical to me. And I think for mysticism for me is a lifelong street fight with faith as the only path to really understanding God. I don't need it to be easy.
And where's the fight? What are the challenges? What's the pushback?
For sure, I can tell you the pushback is super easy. That I think for me, somewhere early in my formation, my spiritual formation, I heard that I needed to find the face of God in everyone I meet. That just seems like bullshit sometimes, but so it does. It just doesn't sound like it doesn't mean I have to respect their opinion or vote for them or, not set boundaries or be friends with them, but I do have to find the face of God in everyone. And that just feels like a big fat bummer sometimes.
I think that's hard for everybody, right? I mean, it's, someone that is mean to you or even, Mother Teresa used to say that this is, related to the poor. She used to call it Christ in distressing disguise.
Oh.
So for some people, it's hard to see God in people who are really, up against it. But I think it sounds like what you're saying is, people might be just jerks, right? Is that the idea?
Yeah, and they just might be jerks and they may have an agenda that is antithetical to my beliefs, antithetical to what I think God, life, care for others means. And maybe wanting to do me harm, politically or personally. And so I think, but it's interesting. We have in our Dare to Lead work, we have a thing called Living Big. What boundaries need to be in place for me to be in my integrity and generous towards you? So I think finding the face of God in people has made me a less nice person and a kinder person.
It's made you a kinder person.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I mean, in the Jesuit tradition, you probably already know this, there's this idea of what's called the presupposition of the spiritual exercises, which is we always try to give people the benefit of the doubt, the plus sign, and try to understand where they're coming from. And but it's a challenge. It really is, especially if people are being mean to you, right? Or being mean to other people. But there is always that invitation. And I think it does make us nicer people.
But don't you think, I have so many questions for you. Don't you think the mystical part for me is, don't you think God is in the wrestling?
I think God's everywhere. So God's in the wrestling that you're going through. So it's an invitation, I would say, to see God in the other person, difficult as it is. Mm-hmm. And so it's in that struggle, right? Like Jacob wrestling with the angel. But I also do think that that God is in the other person, but sometimes it really is difficult to see. And the invitation is to come to know them through their experience, through their stories, right? I think that's why Jesus taught in stories so often, because that's how we come to understand, not in, debates, or you don't come to understand someone just by looking at their resume, their CV. You listen to their stories. And then you can say, sometimes, even with people you really disagree with, okay, now I see this person, right? I see this person as they are. So many of Jesus' parables are about, how we shouldn't see people as other. But look, it's difficult. I mean, I think it was difficult for Jews in first century Judea and Galilee to see Samaritans as,
oh yeah,
and so this is Jesus who puts the Samaritan at the center of so many of his stories, right? Like the Good Samaritan. So, but look, I think what's great, and one of the things I love about your talks, you're very honest. And look, it's hard. That's the point. It's hard. So it's not surprising. Let me ask you. I didn't expect to go here right now, but so what's your spiritual practice now?
Well, thank you very much to you and your people. I'm a huge daily examine person. That's very helpful for me. It intersects nicely with my work and my research on emotional granularity and identifying some of the things I'm feeling. I have a short version of it. I'm not going to lie. It's not as short as the one that my son did. He went to a Jesuit high school and he's like, I was like, sometimes I feel like I'm cheating because I have an hour-long version that I listen to and answer. Then I have a 15-minute and I just do the 15-minute. And he goes, we did we did in 5 minutes. And I was like, yeah, that's because you went to an all-boys school and they knew their audience.
That's right. Well, let me ask you, Brené, for our listeners, talk a little bit about the examine and how you do it and why you find it helpful.
I was worried this was going to come up. And so I tried to memorize everything. And then I was like, screw it, I can't do it. I have a recording that I listen to when I'm walking or I'm just on the mat. And it kind of goes through a list of questions that I answer. And it's got this beautiful music. And then it says, my favorite part is, the God around us, the God between us, and the God within us. And then I pray for the next day. But I'm not good at this because I change the words to all the prayers, even at church, like even the Our Father. I have my own version of that. And my kids, when they were little, were like so mortified. They're like, you need to follow the rules. I was like, I can't.
Can you share with us your Our Father?
I also have my own Hail Mary.
I'd love to hear both of them.
I just don't say deliver us from evil. Mm-hmm. Because when I think of evil, I think of, this is my age, I think of the bad guy in Frosty the Snowman, the cartoon that we saw growing up that had the top hat and like the mustache. And so I just say deliver us from fear and shame. Because I think we are not good as human beings when we're in deep fear and shame. And the combo, I think, is lethal.
Well, I think it's a great insight because, the evil spirit or the accuser does lead us into fear and shame.
Wait, what?
So I would say that the evil spirit, right, or Satan or the devil, however you understand it, I like to say the evil spirit, I think moves us towards shame and moves us towards fear. This is why Jesus says fear not all the time. Fear is so paralyzing for people. Right?
I love this.
Well, and the other thing is, one of my favorite lines in the New Testament is, I'm sure you've heard, "Perfect love drives out fear," right? But I often say,
I have. What does it mean?
Perfect love drives out fear, meaning is if you come into a situation where there is hatred and antagonism and fear, then by loving and living a life of love, you push out that fear. Right? And it's like Jesus coming into the world, he's pushing out fear. But I also think, I sometimes say to people, perfect fear drives out love.
Oh gosh, that's so heavy.
Well,
that's so true.
Yeah. I mean, in my work with LGBTQ people, if you're afraid of somebody and if you're afraid of the other and afraid of people who are different, then you're not going to be able to love them. So perfect fear drives out love too. What's your Hail Mary? What's your version of the Hail Mary?
I take out sinners. Mm-hmm. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with you. Blessed are thou among women, blessed is the fruit of thy womb. Jesus Christ, Holy Mary, Mother of God. Oh yeah, I just say, Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us that are screwing it up. That's all I say. Oh. I don't like the sinners thing. Like I may sin, but I'm not on the sinners train.
Meaning you find that the language uncomfortable or the focus on sin uncomfortable?
I think if you tell a lie, you're not a liar. I think it's very hard from the perspective of my research in social psychology it's okay to change we can change a behavior. I don't want to take on an identity that but I know there's the whole, like, we're all sinners and,
Sure.
that whole thing. I'm not 100% bought on that.
Well, I have to say that's really insightful for me because I've never thought of it that way. Because I often say to people, of course, we're all sinners, right? Because we all sin.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that's a great insight that to have that as your identity, right? In the Jesuits, this might help a little bit. In the Jesuits, we often say people are loved sinners. So we do sinful things, but God loves us. And that people sometimes have an easier time with that. Let me ask you something, though. I'm so fascinated by all this. I've been dying. Here's the question I've been dying to ask you. So after listening,
I'm scared right now.
No, it's a good question. It's a nice question. So I've listened to so many of your talks, and as you know, I mean, obviously, I'm telling you, you talk a lot about vulnerability, questions of shame, and every time I listen to you, I say, I'm going to ask her this. So here's the question. I always think about Jesus. I always think about Jesus when you're talking because he is the model of vulnerability and openness, that you hold out. So I'm just curious where he fits into your life and your spirituality and where also he fits into your teaching, right? Because he is that model of vulnerability, naked on the cross or just being who he is or crying at the tomb of Lazarus. Who is Jesus for you and how does he fit into your life?
I mean, he's got a lot of main character energy for me, but he is very tricky. Jesus is tricky for me.
Why is that?
I don't think I was I'm curious about this. I don't think my upbringing, even in Catholic school, was very Jesus-y compared to non-Catholics. Like I grew up in a God-forward Catholicism, and that Jesus was helpful in understanding what God in flesh, in the hard decisions you have to make every day if you want to live a God-filled life. But I don't know. I saw a bumper sticker the other day in Austin here that said, Jesus, deliver me from your followers.
Of course.
And yeah. And
I have that button. Someone gave it to me a couple of years ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
okay.
sure,
Yeah. So I think it's like water sports and football and patriotism. I consider myself to be an avid football fan, a lover of skiing and tubing, and a real patriot. But the people who disagree with me politically, the far right, they want all those things. And so they took Jesus along with football and all these other things. And so it's hard when I talk about it, when you say the word Jesus, I automatically create space between me and people I love and care for and fight for.
So are you saying that it's hard to relate to the Jesus as he's been presented to you in a sense, or that Jesus has been co-opted and so therefore is in a sense sort of almost a threat? Is that the idea?
You know what Jesus I love?
Which one?
I love Richard Rohr's Cosmic Jesus.
Sure.
Yeah, I am a fan of the Cosmic Jesus. I just think, I don't know, I'm always trying to figure it out. But when I pray, I never talk to Jesus.
Thanks for being so honest. I guess I would ask you, I'm not your spiritual director, but I guess I would ask you is, what about the Jesus so there's the Jesus of whatever, people who kind of co-opt him and use him politically and, boil his message down into things that, really don't make sense and don't sound like they're coming from the Gospels. What about the Jesus that you meet in the Gospels? Like that Jesus?
I love that Jesus.
All right, let's talk about...
I like that Jesus.
Yeah, let's talk about that Jesus. That's the one I was curious about because he is so vulnerable. And the image that we see in so many Catholic churches, which I think some people say is so violent, is also an image of vulnerability. He's naked and accepts... as we were talking about earlier, before we got on, talking about René Girard, right? Who Jesus, as the scapegoat, accepts these punishments and doesn't pass them on, doesn't let them embitter him, right? And the sort of cycle of scapegoating ends with him. But I guess what I'm saying is I see so much connection between your work and vulnerability and love and openness and honesty and the Jesus, I'll say, we find in the Gospels.
Yeah, I mean, yes. Okay, I've never thought about this before, so I'm saying it as I'm thinking it, which I'm not supposed to do on podcasts or any forms of media, but I'm going to do it anyway because I I don't really care. I'm in that season of my life. There's a quote from, it's supposedly attributed to a guy who was a roadie for AC/DC. It's one of my favorite quotes, but I don't quote it often because I think he ended up, I don't know, something got shady with him personally. But the quote is, God is the blanket we throw over mystery and faith to give it a shape. And I thought it's beautiful. I think looking back, Jesus would have been easier for me if there hadn't been so many pictures of him. It's like when MTV first came out and then it ruined your movie of a song because they gave you the movie of the song. And I'm like, that's not what Hungry Like the Wolf is about.
I love that song.
This is, you know what I mean? Like, yeah, because it was the first video I saw, and then my dad came home in the middle of it, and it's like women crawling through a forest, and he ripped the cable out of the wall with his hand. And so then we went back to having one thing on our television besides like the 3 channels, and that was Pong. But I think the efforts to humanize him, which I understand he came down in flesh and blood, it's also my whole thing with communion. Like, is this the flesh and blood of Jesus? I'm not sure, but I'm gonna break bread with people I don't like at the rail. I don't know. I'm conflicted. I'm for the Jesus in the Gospels. I believe that. My relationship with him is contemplative at best.
Well, I would say that's him. That's the real Jesus. You know,
You think so?
of course. I would say that, and of course, the Jesus that's risen and present to us through the sacraments, through the Holy Spirit. I sometimes in spiritual direction will say to people, it's interesting, Brené, that you say this, because often in spiritual direction, people have more trouble with God.
Really?
Yeah, because they see God is the judge. God's going to judge me at the end. A friend of mine memorably said that she sees God, I love this, as the parole officer. So not just that you're going to do a bad thing, but, you know, your whole life has been bad and God's going to like get you and judge you and catch you. And oftentimes people respond more to Jesus because he's more relatable. And maybe this will help you. I sometimes say to people, there's, let's say your name is Joe. There's Joe's God, right? Which is this God of judgment and vindictiveness and a sort of a transactional nature, right? If I do this, God will do this. There's that. And then there's God, right? And there's God as you experience God. And oftentimes I'll say to people, all right, how do you experience God? Like, what's the last experience of God you've had? And they said, oh, I was out in nature and I felt this sense of calm and peace and awe and wonder, you know, right in my heart. And I'll say, well, that's God. Like, that's God, right? Versus Joe's God, which is this God of kind of judgment and vindictiveness, right?
Wow. That's interesting to me.
Yeah, I think the invitation might be to say, there's the Jesus that has been presented to you, and then there's Jesus in the Gospels. And maybe that's why you appreciate Richard Rohr so much, and, you know, the universal Christ or the cosmic Christ.
That's really interesting.
Because we have these preconceived notions, you know, that are put in us by sometimes well-meaning people, sometimes not so well-meaning people. And I often say to people, sorry, I'm not supposed to talk this much on the podcast, but
Oh my God, I love it.
I
Don't
often
stop.
say to people, it's like an idol. So
Yes.
in the Ten Commandments, you know, we're told you shall not have any idols before me. And most people say, well, I don't have idols. I don't have little like metal statues that I worship or little clay figurines. But sometimes the idol in your mind is this sort of false image of God that has to be destroyed. You have to kind of destroy these idols to let the real God shine through. So let me ask you a question. How do you experience God in your daily life, would you say? What ways does God make God's self known to you in your daily life or in your prayer?
Yeah, I get emotional just thinking about it. I don't know. It's like asking a fish to describe water. Like
That's great.
I can speak to the separation more than I can the presence of God. I never don't feel it.
Well, maybe for our listeners who might be listening and love and respect you so much, they're going to want to know, well, what does it mean to feel it? Like, what does that mean?
I think it's just a very confident understanding for me that we are inextricably connected to each other by something greater than us. And for me, that thing that's greater than us is God. And that in God's purest form, God is love, God is good. I don't have a parole officer God. Before I had theology from the Catholic Church as a framework, because I went to Catholic school at 4, because in New Orleans you start kindergarten at 4. I thought that being part of human was magic because I never felt alone. I always knew that I was connected to something greater than me. And I knew as a kid in the back seat, if I looked out a window and saw another kid in the back seat at a stoplight, that we were connected in some way through something bigger. And I didn't know what that was. I would not have called that God. And then as I started to understand more about faith, it gave me language and a scaffolding to understand this feeling of never being alone. Like even in those kind of like really hellish situations where like you're a kid and your parents are fighting, you can hear it through the wall, and that creates an intense sense of unsafety. I knew I wasn't alone. I knew that what I came to understand as God was with me. And that's maybe why like Catholic mysticism, that's probably the origin story of that in my own life, was there was something mystical, something unseen, something that required faith that I felt and still feel no urge to figure out, only to get more of it. I don't want it figured out for me.
Thanks for being so honest about us. I do want to talk about maybe the topic you're most well known for, if that's fair, your research in talking about vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
And in a number of talks, you've said that understanding that brought about a kind of spiritual awakening in you, understanding vulnerability. Can you talk a little bit about that and the connection between vulnerability and spirituality for you?
Yeah, I mean, this would be your very Jesus moment. I think maybe one of the biggest for me personally, and also kind of what I teach, because I do 95% of my work in organizations working with leaders now. So I do mostly leadership work. And I think the biggest aha for me was being completely wrong about my hypothesis on courage. And that the greatest barrier to courage is fear. And we were studying 150 transformational leaders, and these were leaders, every industry, global leaders across the world. And when we identified these leaders, and I said, how do you stay out of fear? I remember one leader kind of said something that encapsulated all the other interviews. He said, if you're making a list of brave leaders and you're defining brave as never being afraid, don't put me on your list. I'm afraid every day. So I was like, criminy, this is my hypothesis. So what I learned in that research was it's not fear that gets in the way of courage. It's armor. It's how we self-protect when we're in fear. It's the armor and the weapons that we are drawn to when we feel uncertainty, risk, and exposure. So the thing that we have to talk about is not fearlessness, because that doesn't exist, and fear can be healthy in some ways. It's what's our armor? How do we self-protect when we feel that way? Because the ways we self-protect often move us away from, for me, they move us away from God. They move me away from God. They move me away from my values. And so I don't know that you could have my upbringing and then write the sentence down, it's not fear that gets in the way of courage, it's armor, and not immediately have a picture of Jesus on the cross. Mm-hmm. Like, I just don't know I just don't know. That's like reflexive Catholic school or something, but like that was there. And so that's when I really thought, how fun to be able to spend the rest of my life trying to understand this relationship.
Well, it's so beautiful to me. I'm just thinking now, Jesus comes into the world without any armor. God comes into the world without armor. in the most vulnerable way possible as an infant, right? Completely
Right.
dependent on his parents. And God leaves the world as Jesus without armor, naked on the cross, spat upon. And his whole life is really about disarming people, right? In that way.
And don't ruin this for me if this is wrong. I need to hold on to this false belief. Like, he was not a sweet guy. He was a tough dude. Like, he did not put up with a lot of stuff, which I like that about Jesus, because I don't need a nice Jesus. I don't really trust nice people. Nice feels performative to me. Kind, compassionate, loving. That's the real deal. But in order to be kind and compassionate and loving, you have to be pretty tough. You have to say, this is unacceptable for me. I see what you're doing. I love you. I see your humanity. This is a no from me. Like, I read him when I go back. That's another thing about Catholics. I did not get a lot of like Bible education. Like, people who are my age that came up through evangelical like lines, they're like 32, 45, hut, it's like there's like football plays. I don't know. I wasn't raised like that. But when you read the gospel or you listen to the liturgy and you've got a priest who's doing a really good homily, you see, this is why I think Carl Jung said that the paradox is the deepest spiritual gift ever given to humans, because you see in Jesus in equal measure strength and vulnerability.
Exactly. Well, and I think, you're absolutely right. He was tough. He was challenging. I mean, he got angry. He turns over the tables in the temple, right?
Yes.
He says to Peter, get behind me, Satan. He calls the disciples, you have little faith. He's tough. He's not just sort of this pushover. It's interesting. We haven't mentioned it yet. Your new book, which is wonderful, Strong Ground, talks about that sort of being nice in terms of leadership roles, right, without being honest. But I never made the connection with Jesus, and he is. And I always find what's interesting, Brené, if I can call you that.
Oh my gosh, yes, please.
That he's always angry on behalf of someone else.
Yes.
So
injustice anger.
Yes. And so it's what's going on and how people are treating the temple. How are people treating the poor? And it's not you're offending me.
No.
Right? It's on behalf of someone else. And it is a kind of righteous anger. But you're right. Anybody who thinks Jesus is kind of like this doe-eyed, sort of namby-pamby, like, oh, whatever. No, he's tough.
He's so tough.
And I always think he was probably physically tough too, right? In terms of just being a carpenter. I mean, he's probably, he had to be tough and walking around. And so, yeah, let me shift a little bit because I know I'm conscious of time. I frankly would like to talk to you for the next 6 hours. But,
I could do it too. It's so fun.
I would. Let me ask you, you tell this in your book, which is great, by the way, Strong Ground,
Thank you.
I will hold up and recommend to everybody. You do at the very beginning. You tell this story about getting injured playing pickleball, which you tell in a very funny way. Can you talk about that experience? I just think it's a great story and sort of what it taught you.
Yeah. No, I played tennis for 30 years, and during the pandemic, I had a couple of friends that said, you should really try pickleball. And I was like, I'm a tennis player. I don't do that. So it took me a couple of years to try it and 2 games to never, I will tell you, I have not picked up a tennis racket since that day. I play pickleball 6 days a week, 2 hours a time. I'm completely addicted to it. But I think a lot of it is about identity. I think I have an identity that's really important to me as an athlete. I grew up kind of very athletic. And so I was a swimmer, played tennis. And it was the first time as an adult that I was like, I'm competitive again. Like, I'm going to start winning some shit like for real right now. Like, I'm going to make people regret their life choices.
That's a good motivation for going out on the pickleball court.
Right, exactly. So I wormed my way into this game with some folks who were better than me. First serve, I don't know what happens, but I was pretty sure someone had come in behind me and stabbed me. Like, I fell to the ground. It was so humiliating for like 30 minutes. I couldn't get up. They finally got me in my car. I got home. It was terrible. about a month later, people kept saying, you should go see this guy named Tony. He's a trainer. He works with a lot of injuries in sports, blah, blah, blah. So I go see Tony. I walk in, I'm like, look, I'm really competitive and I need to get better. So let's move some heavy shit and let's go. Let's start doing it. And he looks at me and he said, well, we're going to take a test first. So I was like, okay, whatever. I take the test and he's like, you scored a 10. I'm like, no kidding. I know, let's go. And he said, you scored a 10 out of 22. Your physical age is like late 70s. You have no core and you are so prone to injury right now. I don't even know if you should be on the court. I mean, oh my God, my feelings were so hurt. I just couldn't even believe it. And so he said, you have a compensatory injury because you have no core and you're using inefficient muscle groups to do the work of large muscle groups that are just not in shape. I kept just saying, this is like my stunned response, apparently, because I do this a lot. I don't understand. What are you saying? I don't understand. And he said, you have no core, no lats, no stomach, no glutes, no core. So you're using arms and legs and you're getting injured. So we started working and I said, can I lift stuff? Can I do something? He's like, no, we're not going to build on dysfunction. Well, for like a month, twice a week, everything he said to me about needing to build this core completely tracked to what was happening in the C-suite, with the C-suite leaders and the senior leaders that I was working with around the world. Like, they were sustaining as organizations compensatory injuries because they had no core. I mean, I think this could be true, to be honest with you, of the church. Like, the injuries I think the church can take on sometimes are because they're not paying attention to the core. Like, I want to come to you, break bread, feel God, sing with strangers, go to the rail. I do not want your advice on the people I should vote for. Mm-hmm. You are out of line. And that is a compensatory injury, I think, to the church and also to me. And so it was true of organizations. And then as I think about AI, shifting markets, all the things that I talk about with leaders, the AI thing was like building on dysfunction. Like, both my trainer and my physical therapist said, we're not going to build on dysfunction. Like, I know you don't like to do these like little bitty 3-inch squats standing on one foot. You want to like go knock a medicine ball into a wall, but we're not going to build on dysfunction. And I think, Strong Ground is above all else a leadership book, and it's about transforming organizations and teams. And the metaphor was just so right there for me. Like, there was a moment when I was trying to do a lat pull down. I said, this hurts my shoulders. And he's like, Tony said, you're not supposed to be using your shoulders. And he's like, he called me Brown. And he was like, Brown, I want you to find your ground. And I looked at the floor and he goes, no, not the floor. Find your ground. Use your mind to tell your body to find the ground. Push your feet into the ground, making a connection with the ground. And for me, I was able to do it, but it was a very spiritual experience.
Well, yeah. And, I would thank you for sharing that, because it struck me in the book that it is, obviously not just for C-suite people, but it's for anyone in life and anyone who has a spiritual life. Because what is your core, right? And where is your core and where is your ground, right?
That's it.
That's beautiful. One of my favorite definitions of God is the ground of all being, which I just love. Yeah, the ground of all being.
I'm writing that down.
Well, I would like to talk to you for the next 6 hours, but we can't. We have an audience question to wrap up.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, but it really fits with your experience. So it's from someone named Nick. And Nick asks, how can one return to an active practice of faith after a long absence?
I don't know that I have any wisdom there. I can just speak from personal experience.
Yeah, please.
Which is, I find my faith always there, open arms, no judgment. And, if I was dialoguing with my faith about my absence, I think my faith would say, I love that you followed where you needed to go. I'm here. and maybe what you brought back from your adventure away from this will help deepen what we can build together now. I mean, one thing that's become very clear to me in this conversation that I don't think I've ever thought about before in my life is my God, my confusing but fun rumble with Jesus. Nothing about my faith life is punitive. People are punitive. God is not for me. And so I think being clear about why you're going back or what you want from it and being open to it being completely different than what you're going to get is the nature of it. I guess one of the things for me that I'm realizing again through this conversation, it's really meaningful to me. So thank you. I really appreciate it. I don't want to solve the mystery. I want to live in the mystery.
Well, you said that you don't have any wisdom, but that's very wise. The other great definition of God, or at least faith, is, God is not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be pondered. I'm sure you've heard that.
I've never heard that.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites. I can't thank you enough. Thank you so much for your time, Brené Brown. Congratulations on the new book, Strong Ground. And, I really want to say thank you for being vulnerable with us about your faith, and also thank you for something that people don't do a lot on podcasts, which is to think out loud and to really sort of just allow people to see your own thought process. I'm really very grateful that you joined us today. So thanks very much.
Thank you. And thank you for your work. And thank you for being a part of my practice. Thank you for providing us with great questions and fewer answers. Those are actually the people I trust.
You're welcome. God bless you.
Yeah. God bless you too.
Well, look, that was just amazing, frankly.
Yeah. I can't believe we got Brené Brown on The Spiritual Life.
I was so happy that she was so open and vulnerable.
Yeah, I mean, she is known for her vulnerability
Right.
and for her insights on vulnerability. But the fact that she was able to model that just in the way that she took her time to think about the questions you posed and to respond and to sometimes say, I don't know, let me think about that. That's really interesting.
Well, I really respected that. And I think it's going to resonate with people who, are on their own spiritual journeys and struggle with things. And she struggled with the church, and she's even struggled with images of Jesus, which I found fascinating. And I think that's a great model to say you don't have to have these answers kind of, on the tip of your tongue and, with the snap of a finger.
Yeah.
I just found her really compelling. And I was just so grateful for it.
Yeah. Now, on the subject of images of Jesus and of God, you had a real robust conversation there where, you said very helpfully that there's kind of the images or sometimes the idols that we have around God and Jesus, and then there's the real experience of God.
Yeah, I find that over and over in spiritual direction, that people have an image of God, and the image of God is often tied to, I didn't mention this in the podcast, but it's often tied to authority figures in our lives. So if you had a parent or parents who were demanding and exacting and strict, right, and felt like very transactional, like I'll only love you if you do this, or if you had teachers or mentors who were like that, you often place those images on God, and God becomes this, as I said, parole officer or judge, or, obviously God's eventually going to, judge what we did, but the primary image of God as judge is really difficult for a lot of people. And, you sometimes have to ask the person, what's your experience of God, right? Who is God in your life? And it's often completely different from this sort of demanding parole officer. And you have to say, if I were talking to you, Maggie, I'd have to say there's Maggie's God, which is this sort of construction sometimes that, has been imposed on you, right, of God. And then there's God, right? And what's your experience of God? And when people say to me, my experience of God is one of peace and love and joy and calm. And I'll say, well, that's God. So look for signs of that experience in your life to, be open to God's presence. And again, you sometimes have to smash that idol. Now, that doesn't mean that everything you're taught about God by teachers and religious leaders is wrong, but often it can prevent us, that kind of idol or that kind of false image of God can prevent us from really encountering the true God who really wants to meet us as God is, right? So it's, Yeah, it's a real challenge for people. And also she talked about that in terms of Jesus. I found that really interesting, Maggie.
You know what struck me is sometimes the images or the false idols we have of God, they are creations of our imagination and they kind of live in our heads. And I'm an intellectual person, you're an intellectual person, Brené's an intellectual person, like with all of the academic study that we've all done. And there is nothing wrong with having that kind of intellectual curiosity, and we can find God there. But I think it's interesting that our experience of God isn't necessarily nestled in the intellectual, but it is felt. It's a felt experience. And I think as intellectuals, we can sometimes bypass that felt experience.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think it's kind of both. I mean, we want to know who Jesus was in the Gospels. That was a good part of our conversation.
Yeah.
It's important to know who he was and who he is, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it can't just be that. It can't just be something in the head, right?
Yeah.
It does have to be experienced. And it is, in the end, mystery, right? And she alluded to this, if I think Thomas Aquinas said, if you can define it, it's not God, right? So ultimately it's mystery. But I really do think that sometimes we do have to kind of smash those idols in our minds of what God is and really encounter the living God.
And one of the things that can help us do that is what Brené mentioned, the examine, right? Could you define the examine for those who haven't heard of it?
Yeah, I was so touched that she brought that up. And the examine or examination of conscience is an end-of-the-day prayer. Sometimes people do it in the morning, where you look back at the last 24 hours and you basically try to see where God was, right? You start with gratitude, right? Because we need to ground ourselves in gratitude. Maybe think about a couple things that you're grateful for in the last 24 hours. And then just go through your day and say, where did I encounter God? Where did I turn away from God? Look at places where you might have failed or even sinned. Ask for forgiveness in your own way. And then ask for the grace to meet God the next day. And what happens is you start to see patterns like, I noticed God in my interaction with Maggie, right? For example, which I do. And so the next day when I'm with Maggie, you'll be more attentive to that, right? So it's a way of really seeing where God was, which helps us to see where God is and where God will be. I'll tell you an interesting story. The former Superior General of the Society of Jesus, Peter Hans Kolvenbach, in a book I did called How Can I Find God?, talked about looking back and it being easier to see God in the past. And his image was, which is really beautiful, was where Moses says to God, "May I see your face?" And God says, "No, but you will see me pass."
Oh.
Which I love. And so it's easier to see
and
God.
Looking back.
Yeah, and looking back. And so the examine is basically, and there's lots of different ways to do it. Brené mentioned that. The examine is basically a 15, 20-minute review of the day where you see where God was. And that, again, helps you to see where God is and where God will be.
Well, great.
This is our final episode of the first season of the Spiritual Life podcast. And I just want to say thank you, Maggie, and thank you to everyone who's involved in this.
It has been such an exciting, wonderful, intriguing, interesting ride to be along with you. And I'm so grateful to produce the show.
Well, wonderful. We will return with all new episodes in the new year. But in the meantime, we have a great podcast to hold you over called Hark, another podcast from America Media, hosted and produced by Maggie. So Maggie, please tell us about Hark and where listeners can find it. It's such a great podcast.
Yeah. So Hark, as the name might suggest, is a podcast about the stories behind our favorite Christmas carols. It comes from like Hark the Herald Angels Sing. This is our 5th season. And so we have a catalog of, 17 plus carols that we've featured in the past. And in each episode, we look at kind of the musical composition behind the song. So I talk to composers, conductors, artists about what really makes this song catchy and enduring, especially over hundreds of years sometimes. And then I'll talk to like a scripture scholar, a theologian, a cultural expert about the lyrics, like the meaning that these lyrics convey. And it is a storytelling podcast. It is very narrative driven. It's kind of like a deep dive, immersive experience into one carol per episode. And then we only feature 4 episodes in the weeks of Advent leading up to Christmas. The first episode will come out November 30th. And I can't reveal what it will be because we like that Advent spirit of anticipation and surprise, but it's a joy to make.
Well, it's a joy to listen to, too. It's also, I guess you could say, really sort of well-produced, right? I mean,
Thanks.
the music, the interviews, the insights. It's just a joy to listen to. And I think what's been interesting for me is even songs or hymns or carols that I don't know, right? I've been introduced to them. You end up loving them by the end. So thanks for doing this. So Maggie, where can listeners find Hark?
Sure. Hark is on American Media's website. It's wherever you listen to podcasts, and we'll provide a link in the show notes so that people can go right there.
Well, thanks so much. And we will see you all in the second season of The Spiritual Life next year. And you can read an article I wrote about this episode at americamagazine.org or by clicking the link in the show notes. Thank you so much, and God bless you.